This video is sponsored by Square Enix. Thank you, Square Enix. Final Fantasy VII is one of the most beloved games of all time. So beloved, in fact, that it is one of the few Final Fantasies that can be considered its own separate franchise. Final Fantasy VII has gotten movies, different side games, and even a full remake series that isn't just a remake, it is also in its own way a sequel of sorts. However, one of the most highly praised parts of the Final Fantasy VII series is a side game focusing on a character that is not present throughout the events of Final Fantasy VII. Square decided to release a PSP game that told the backstory of Cloud and a character named Zack through Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. For many years, this game has been stuck on the PlayStation Portable. However, finally, in 2022, Square Enix decided to re-release this game on all platforms, in the form of Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion. I want to talk about my thoughts on the game. I played through the PlayStation 5 version, then Square Enix very graciously gifted me the Nintendo Switch edition of the game. So I'm going to be able to give you guys both perspectives on both PS5 and Switch. The Switch is definitely a bit of an interesting choice, especially considering that this game isn't the most graphically intensive game, but it's definitely higher than what most Switch games can usually handle. So to just make it clear, I did play through the entire game from start to finish on my PS5. All of the footage I'm going to be showing today is going to be all up until the end of Chapter 1 on Switch. I don't want to show more because this game did come out this month. I know it's technically a almost 2-decade-old game at this point, but I do think this game is worth experiencing blind, even if all of us already knows what happens at the end of this game. Like, that's the entire point of this game. So first I want to talk about the story, which I feel like the first bit of this game is very different from what I was expecting from the rest of this game. It introduces a lot of different characters such as Angeal, Genesis, and we also see a different side of Sephiroth, as we don't really see that side of Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII. They also had a really interesting story that I just really wasn't expecting, about it being about copying different characters. It was very interesting to see. Another thing that was really interesting to see was Cloud. Cloud has an entirely different personality in this game, and it was so interesting to see. From him being such a hard ass in the original 7 to seeing him being this kind of shy person. Like, you definitely see like the original Cloud in there, but it is just, you just know he just hasn't been through all the stuff yet that he has seen prior to Final Fantasy VII. I was also a really big fan of seeing a lot of the returning characters, such as seeing Yuffie while she's still a kid in Wutai, seeing Aerith. I thought, oh my god, the Aerith chapters I thought were some of the best. I loved Aerith in this game. Getting to have her interactions with Zack, it really does set in the heartbreak that you're gonna feel in this game. However, the next thing I want to talk about is the gameplay, which I feel like, I don't know, I wasn't really sure what to expect out of the gameplay of this game. I knew very little about Crisis Core going into this game, except that it was Zack's backstory, but the gameplay, I had no idea what it played like. So I was really surprised to see that it was pretty much just a very simplified 7 remake. Like, there's a lot of stuff that is in 7 remake that you can't do here, but it did feel fun. I thought it was a really fun action RPG. It definitely does have a lot of those like smaller areas, like, because of course the game was designed for the PSP. They didn't go back and rework everything because of it being on modern platforms. The game does get a pretty massive graphical boost. Like, this is more than like any remaster normally gets. Like, it is pretty much the same game, same animation, same everything, except everything on the visual side is entirely redone. Lastly, before we move on from gameplay, I do also want to mention, I think this might be one of the easiest JRPGs I have ever played. I don't know how they balanced the difficulty in this game, but I played it on normal and I had no issues. There was never a single point during my playthrough that I ever got stuck. And when I started replaying the game on Switch, I just switched it over to hard mode, and honestly, it is not that much more difficult. It's just some attacks do more damage. Which can actually bring us into the conversation of PS5 versus Switch. So PS5, I do think it is pretty close to the original remake. The only time that I ever notice it is when you have like close-ups of animations, and you can very much so tell that they are old PSP animations, just using these really high quality models. However, the Switch version, I was a little less impressed with. Of course, the Switch is a lot less powerful. I was expecting a bump in quality. Definitely the quality of the models are a pretty big step down, especially when it comes to the hair. The hair looks really different. However, I will say one thing that both versions get really good is the frame rate. I had no frame rate drops on either version of the game, and I think that is the most important part. I will say, if you have something else to play Crisis Core on and you don't mind not playing it horribly, I would suggest playing it somewhere else. But the Switch version, if it is your only option, I do think it is a very good version of the game. Just kind of wish it was a bit better graphically. Next, we could talk about the voice acting, which I'm not familiar with the old voice acting all that much because I've only seen clips of the old voice acting. But a lot of people have been talking about how bad the voice acting is in this game, and I honestly don't think I agree. I don't think the voice acting is outstanding or anything, but I don't think it is as bad as I've heard other people say. I think it is just alright, and I feel like people thinking it's bad is probably just their brain not fully switching over to the new voice actors and still used to the old ones. It'll probably be something that you get more used to with time, but also if you're so used to this one voice actor playing this one character for so many years, I can totally see why that would be something that is a huge standout. Honestly, most of the voice acting issues I've heard is specifically with Zack.
Thanks?
But, I don't know. I think Zack's alright. I don't think he is outstandingly bad, but I also don't think he's outstandingly good. I just think he's alright. I don't think the voice acting breaks this game. Lastly, I want to talk about some side content for the game, which this game has so much side content. There is a list of missions that you get pretty much at the start of the game, and you unlock more missions the more you play, and some are locked behind story moments. Doing these side quests are definitely worth it because they are how you unlock summons to use in battle, and just other goodies that you can get throughout the game. But there are so many. I spent a good 2 or 3 hours just grinding out missions, and I was only like 20% done. So I was like, alright, I'm not going to do this right now. There is a lot of side content there for people who are wanting to do it. I didn't do all of it, but I do think it is fun stuff to do. And there are actual side quests in the game, like throughout the story, there is like a point where they're like, hey, here's some actual side quests that you could do in the world, go find this stuff. And I think that's fun too. Definitely those bigger side quests outside of the mission menu are definitely not as big as the other missions that you have in the game. And I kind of wish we had more of those, but I do think they are still worth having here. I want to wrap this up by talking about the switch from PSP to home console, which, as I mentioned before with the environments, I do feel like it is fairly obvious that this was a PSP game, especially when you see those cinematic cutscenes that are running in 480p stretched on a 4K monitor. It is fairly clear that Square Enix didn't have these videos properly backed up in a way that they could re-render them to be in a higher quality. So they do look very pixely. They did try to upscale the videos in some way, but I don't think it worked super well in my own personal opinion. So while these cutscenes animation-wise still look incredible and are on par with something along the lines of Advent Children, it still does stand out that a lot of the actual footage itself is very crunchy. There's not a whole lot they could have done outside of just redoing all of the cutscenes from scratch, which would have been way more effort than they were worth. But it is definitely a little bit of a standout in terms of quality while seeing these cutscenes. But overall, I think Crisis Core, regardless of it being on a handheld or not, I think Crisis Core is an amazing game. I really did like it. I don't think it beats the original 7 nor remake. It is a very important game to play before going into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth sometime next year. Once again, thank you so much Square Enix for providing me a review code for Crisis Core. I really enjoyed playing through this game, and I loved looking through the Switch version and seeing what I could find. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.